Hello, IST 659 students. This video will teach you how to normalize data using Microsoft Visio. This video is something you should watch before you try to do Lab 4. It'll help you with knowing how to look at a spreadsheet of data and turn it into a normalized database ERD. So what we'll do is we'll use this example you can see on the spreadsheet, which is a list of the inventory of books that we have in our fictional bookstore. Now, if you take a look at this data, you can see that for each book we keep track of the title. Now, the titles can repeat. We keep track of the authors. You'll notice that a book can have more than one author, and one author can write more than one book. So we have a many-to-many relationship between books and authors. For each book we keep track of the number of pages, the publisher. Now you'll notice that whoever was entering our spreadsheet at our company wasn't always consistent. So we have the same publisher here listed in two different ways, which would be a problem if we tried to do some grouping or reporting using our spreadsheet. We have a price for each book. For some of our books we keep track of the edition. Some books don't have edition numbers. We have the year published, and then we have the publisher contacts. So those would be the people we contact if we want to order more books or want to know when a book is being printed, that kind of thing. You'll notice some redundancy here. So we have two books by the same publisher, so we had to enter the publisher contacts more than once. You'll also notice some missing data here. Even though these two rows are for the same publisher, we have one row with a contact, one row without. And then you'll notice here, for this publisher, whoever entered these two rows put different publisher contacts, even though it's the same publisher. So you can see some problems when you enter data in a spreadsheet that's not normalized, like inconsistency and missing data, redundancy, and so on. So let's go ahead and create a database diagram in Visio that would allow us to store this data in a more sensible way. So hopefully you've watched last week's video, which is the video where I taught everyone how to use Microsoft Visio to make an ERD. So I'm assuming everyone has watched that and knows how to use Visio. So I won't be explaining how to do each thing. I'll just be showing, what tables and fields and relationships to create. So what table should I create first? Well, we are keeping track of books at our bookstore, so I think a book table would be a good way to start. So let's go ahead and start up Visio. Pick the crow's foot notation, create. Now, just like in my last video, I'll remind you guys that I like to switch my ERDs to be landscape, just because database diagrams usually look better when they're laid out so that they're wider rather than longer, because if you have relationships between tables, sometimes it looks better to put the tables sort of in a row next to each other. Let's start with a book table. I'm going to zoom in a little. Okay, so we start with our book table. As far as the primary key to use, you could choose to use ISBN or some kind of other natural key. But just to make things simple, I'm going to say I'll generate my own key. We'll just call it book ID. And anything that's a primary key is a required field, so Visio doesn't do that automatically, but we'll set it required. So what do I need to keep track of for each book? Well, we have the title. Let's put that in. I guess we could say book title to have good naming conventions. Now, are we going to store the author in this table? Well, if we put one author field, then we'd have to have the names separated by commas or something like that. But that would make it hard to report on the data, because if someone didn't enter the authors in the same order or didn't put the right separators between the data, then whatever reporting that we created might not show effectively the list of authors. Also, people might be inconsistent in typing in the name differently. Like here we have Jeffrey A. Hoffer, but somebody might type in Jeffrey Hoffer, if we had just a single field for author. Now we could put like an author 1, author 2, author 3 field in our book table, but what if we had 4 authors? Then we'd have to keep making our author table have more columns. So I think our author and book relationship really is a many-to-many. This is the same issue that I posted a discussion question about, saying how would you model a database that had a many-to-many relationship between book and author, and some people had some good responses. Basically what I was looking for is the idea of creating a bridge table between books and authors, which is what we'll do in this exercise. So for now, we are not going to store author in the book table, since we'll cover that with our many-to-many relationship. So we'll skip author. Let's do pages. Publisher. So should we just put a column that says publisher name? Well, that could be a problem because, as you can see, if you're just typing the publisher name each time you add a book, you might type it inconsistently. So I think it would be better to actually have a separate publisher table. So if you could picture your book form, it would have like a combo box where you would select the publisher rather than type it in. So we would need a foreign key to our publisher table to handle that. But we don't have a publisher table yet, so let's just skip that field for now. Let's do book price. We need a new attribute, so we'll drag it over. Edition. Year published. And the final column, publisher contacts. Now, publisher contacts are related to the publisher, not the book. So we don't want to store that in our book table. That would not be normalizing properly. So let's decide which columns should be required. Well, looking at our spreadsheet, we always have a book title, we always have pages, we always have a price, we always have a year, but we don't always have an edition. So let's make everything required except the edition. So required, 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 not required, and required. So we have a book table. What's next? Now let's handle this author column. So as I mentioned before, a book can have many authors and one author can write many books. So that's a perfect situation where you want a bridge table. So let's create an author table. We'll create an author ID. Let's say that would be some kind of auto number that we generate. Author last name. Author first name. And we'll add in an author middle initial. So we could keep track of a lot more fields in our author table, maybe their contact information, that kind of thing. But for now, we're just kind of worrying about the relationships, so we don't have to add all the possible fields, just to make this quicker. Let's set our required fields. Primary key is always required. Let's say the last name is required, the first name is required, but the middle initial not required. Now we need our bridge table, because we have a many-to-many relationship between book and author. Oh, I should not have called my table book ID, just book. Sorry about that. So what do we need to do? Let's create a new entity. With bridge tables, it's good to use the combination of names of the two tables, like book author. Just spacing these apart a bit so I have room to show the relationship line. Okay. Now, book author will just keep track of the relationship between books and authors. So we need our two primary keys from our two tables we're bridging, book ID and author ID. This will be extra, we don't need that column. Let's move this line down to indicate both of these are primary keys. Now we're going to set both of them to primary key, foreign key, and required. Hard to click on it sometimes. Okay, so we have book table, author table, and bridge table. Let's bring in our relationships. You'll remember from the last video, it's a good idea to make your connectors bigger so that you can see them better when you print it, or if you zoom out. So let's set these arrow sizes to jumbo. Alright, so one book, I'm just going to drag this so it highlights the entire table. Oh, that's funny. Okay, sometimes it connects it in a weird way. And this side of the connector will go on book author. There, that's better. Although I'd like to have it connect into the side. There we go. Alright, so one book has 0 or many book authors, and one book author record is for one and only one book. Let's connect the other table in. I like to just click on my existing relationship line, do copy, paste. Just a little quicker than creating a new one. Okay, so each author, try to drag it on the table, has 0 or many book authors. Bring this down a little. Doesn't quite line up, so I'll fix it here. You don't have to do this, it kind of bugs me when it doesn't line up right. There. So we've taken care of that. We have our book author and book author table. Let's see what else we have in our spreadsheet. This is good, this is good, good. Now, publisher. Let's create a table for publisher, because we don't want to have to type the publisher name in for each book, which could introduce inconsistencies like it did on the spreadsheet. So I'm going to create another entity. Let's call this publisher. Publisher ID and publisher name. Let's not worry about storing any other data in the publisher table now. We probably would want to store like the publisher location, publisher website, that kind of thing. But just to keep our data model small enough to fit on the screen, we'll just keep this simple. Let's delete this extra field. And publisher ID, that needs to be required. Publisher name, let's say all our publishers need a name. Now, how do we link publishers to books? Well, between our book table and an author table, we had a many-to-many relationship. But I'm going to say the business rule is that each book is only published by one publisher. So we don't need to have like many publishers to many books. That will keep things simpler. What we need to do is add a foreign key in our book table to our publisher table. So let's add an attribute here. Call this publisher ID. And let's say it's required. All books need a publisher. And let's mark this as a foreign key. Now all that's left, let me just fix this, line it up. Now all we need to do is just add the relationship. So just going to copy this relationship and connect it up. So one publisher has 0 to many books. There we go. Maybe I'll move it up because we have one more table to make. So what have we covered so far? We have now covered titles, authors, pages, publishers, price, editions, year published. Finally, we have publisher contacts. So as you can see, some publishers have no contacts, or in this case I guess this was just inconsistent, so I guess this publisher does have a contact, but we could have some publishers with no contacts. Some publishers have one contact and some have many. So I think we have a one-to-many relationship between publishers and publisher contacts. So let's create our last entity. We'll call it publisher contact. We can call it maybe publisher contact ID. That's our primary key. We'll just have it be a auto number that Access generates. I'm going to move this table up a little. I want to make a little bit more room for my publisher contact table so I can add more attributes. What do we need to do with publisher contact? Let's have a publisher contact name. Now I could say publisher contact last name like this, but that's kind of a long field name, and if you're doing a report or a query and you need to type in the names of the attributes, it can help to not make them too long. So instead of saying that, one naming convention you can use is just use a naming convention that just basically takes the first letter of each word in your table name as the prefix to each field. So instead of saying publisher contact first name, publisher contact last name, we'll just say PC. So PC last name, PC first name. We will add a middle initial just because we've been doing it with our other tables. And why don't we say what we care about is the email address and the phone. We probably would also care about mailing address, but just to save room on our screen, let's just add phone and email. Okay, somehow we have primary key on phone. Maybe I grabbed this primary key attribute by mistake, but that's easy enough to fix. Let's just oops, turn off the primary key here. That was just a mistake. Oh, and the one thing we forgot is, of course, we need a foreign key to the publisher table, so we know which publisher a given contact works for. So, publisher ID. I usually like to put my foreign keys at the top of my table just so they stand out more. That's totally just a personal preference, but just something I like to do for myself. So I'll move it up there. Let's mark that as a foreign key. Sorry about that, just had a phone call. Okay, so we have all our columns in the publisher contact name. I'm sorry, in the publisher contact entity. Let's decide on what's required. Obviously, primary key needs to be required. Publisher ID, yes, we want each contact to be linked to a publisher. Let's say last name and first name is required. We won't make phone or email required just in case we only have the phone or only the email. So we don't necessarily, we can't say we will know always their phone or email. So we'll just make last name, first name required. And the last thing is just a relationship. Let's move this over. I'm just going to copy this relationship line. So we need to have a one-to-many between publisher and publisher contact. Because each publisher has 0 or many contacts, and each publisher contact belongs to one and only one publisher. So that's it. That's our entire data model. Let's see if I can get this to fit on the screen. Maybe zoom out a little bit. Maybe 90. Let's see how that looks. Is that all the fields? Good. Okay, so we have our data model. And just to review, we started with a spreadsheet that was denormalized, meaning that we didn't have good relationships between the data. We had inconsistencies, we had repetition of data, and we took a look and saw how we could break this up into different entities with different relationships, figured out which attributes belong to which entities, and decided on the cardinality of our relationships, meaning these lines. So again, we have our book table, which is kind of the most important table. We have an author table, and those are linked by this bridge table. Each book has a publisher, and then each publisher has 0 or many contacts. So that is how you go through the process of data normalization and creating a data model for a set of data. I hope that was useful to everyone, and hopefully this will help you accomplish Lab 4. Thank you.